The leather-bound copy of Don Quixote slipped from Helena's fingers and crashed to the floor, startling her awake at her desk in the small library, as the afternoon sun blazed through the dusty windows of Calistoga, California, in the summer of 1883. She rubbed her eyes and glanced around the quiet room, grateful no patrons had witnessed her momentary lapse. The library occupied the ground floor of a two-story building on Lincoln Avenue, its shelves packed with volumes she had carefully cataloged and maintained over the past 3 years. At 24, Helena Brennan had devoted herself entirely to this sanctuary of words, finding more comfort in fictional heroes than the rough miners and ranch hands who occasionally stumbled through her doors seeking respite from the scorching heat. The town of Calistoga sat in the northern reaches of Napa Valley, known more for its hot springs and volcanic soil than its literary pursuits. Most folks came to work the vineyards or seek their fortunes in the silver mines dotting the surrounding mountains. Helena had arrived from San Francisco after her father's death, seeking a quieter life away from the crowded city streets. The library position had seemed perfect, a modest salary and living quarters upstairs where she could lose herself in stories until the early morning hours. She bent to retrieve the fallen book when the door swung open with enough force to make the bell above it clang violently. Helena straightened, clutching Don Quixote to her chest as a mountain of a man ducked through the doorframe. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the entrance. His hair, dark brown and sun-streaked, fell past his collar in waves that suggested months without a proper trim. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his arms, visible beneath rolled shirt sleeves, displayed muscles that spoke of years hauling timber and surviving in the wilderness. "We are open," Helena said, her voice steadier than she felt, "though I ask that you treat the door more gently." The man's eyes, a startling green against his tanned face, swept the room before settling on her. "Apologies, miss." Wind caught it. His voice rumbled deep and rough, like distant thunder rolling through the mountains. Helena set Don Quixote on her desk and smoothed her navy skirt. "Are you looking for something specific, or merely seeking shelter from the heat?" "Neither." He approached her desk with surprising grace for someone his size, pulling a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "Looking for someone who might help me with this." She took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a letter written in an elegant script. The contents detailed a property dispute, full of legal terminology and references to land grants. "Where did you get this?" "County office in Napa. They are trying to claim my land up in the mountains. Been living there 7 years, built everything myself." He gestured to the letter. "Cannot make sense of half those words. Figured a library might have someone educated enough to help." Helena read through the document again more carefully. "This is quite serious. They are citing an old Spanish land grant that apparently supersedes your claim." "I know it is serious. That is why I am here instead of up at my camp." Frustration edged his words. "Name is Thaddeus Pierce. Folks call me Pierce mostly. What do I call you, Miss Brennan?" "Helena Brennan." She moved to one of the shelves along the back wall, running her finger along the spines until she found what she needed. "I have some legal references that might help clarify this situation." "You know about land law?" Skepticism colored his tone. "I know about research, Mr. Pierce. And I know how to read." She pulled down 3 heavy volumes and carried them to a reading table. "If you can spare the time, we can go through these together." He glanced at the window, measuring the angle of the sun. "Got nowhere else to be. They gave me 30 days to respond or forfeit." They spent the next 2 hours poring over the legal texts, Helena explaining the complex language while Pierce listened intently. occasionally asking questions that showed a sharp mind despite his lack of formal education. She learned he had come west from Virginia after the war, unable to stomach returning to his family's ruined plantation. He had worked various jobs before settling in the mountains above Calistoga, building a cabin near a creek and living off the land, selling furs and timber when he needed supplies. "You have been alone up there all this time?" Helena asked, pausing her reading. "Suits me. Had enough of people during the war." He leaned back in the chair, which creaked under his weight. "Mountain does not ask questions or tell lies. Books do not either," Helena said softly. "They simply exist, offering their wisdom to anyone willing to look." Pierce studied her with those keen green eyes. "You live here alone, too, above the library. I have my books and the townspeople when I need company." She returned her attention to the text before her, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "According to this, your best defense would be proving continuous habitation and improvement of the land. Do you have any documentation, receipts for materials, correspondence with merchants?" "Keep records of my timber sales. Got receipts for the nails and tools I bought when I first built the cabin. That is a start. You will need to gather everything and present it to a judge." Helena made notes on a piece of paper. "I can help you draft a formal response to this claim." "Why would you do that?" Pierce asked. "Do not even know me." Helena met his gaze directly. "Because it is unjust. You worked hard for what you have, and someone is trying to take it through legal manipulation. I may not be a lawyer, but I can read and write well enough to help you fight back." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Obliged, Miss Brennan. Truly." They worked until the library's closing time, Helena drafting a response while Pierce provided details about his property and improvements. By the time she walked him to the door, the summer evening had cooled the air to something almost pleasant. "When should I return?" Pierce asked, pausing on the threshold. "Tomorrow, same time. Bring whatever documentation you have, and we will refine this response further." Helena held the letter they had drafted. "I will make a clean copy tonight." He nodded, settling his worn hat on his head. "Miss Brennan, I do not forget kindness. You need anything, you have but to ask." She watched him walk down Lincoln Avenue, his long stride carrying him quickly out of sight. Only then did she realize she had smiled more in the past few hours than she had in months. She locked the library door and climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, the letter clutched in her hand, and her mind already working on improvements to their arguments. That night, Helena sat at her small table with her oil lamp burning, carefully transcribing their response in her neatest handwriting. But her thoughts kept drifting to Thaddeus Pierce, to the contradiction he presented. Such a powerful physical presence, yet he had sat patiently for hours, listening and learning. She had expected impatience or dismissiveness, the attitude many men displayed when a woman offered expertise they lacked. Instead, he had treated her knowledge with respect, even gratitude. She finished the letter near midnight and fell into bed with a copy of Jane Eyre, but even Mr. Rochester's brooding intensity could not hold her attention. Her mind wandered to green eyes and calloused hands carefully turning pages, to a deep voice asking thoughtful questions about property law. Pierce returned the next afternoon carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers. Helena cleared one of the reading tables, and they spread out 7 years of receipts, correspondence, and records. She organized everything chronologically while Pierce explained the context of each transaction. "You are quite meticulous for someone who claims to avoid civilization," Helena observed, examining a neatly written ledger of timber sales. "War taught me to keep good records. Supplies meant survival." He pointed to an entry. "That was my first winter up there. Thought I might freeze to death, but the cabin held." They incorporated the documentation into their response, building a case that demonstrated continuous occupation and significant improvements to the property. Helena found herself enjoying the work more than she expected, the challenge of constructing legal arguments engaging a part of her mind that cataloging books never quite satisfied. "You have a talent for this," Pierce said, reading over the revised letter. "Ever think about studying law proper?" Helena laughed, a sound that surprised them both. "Women are not exactly welcomed in law schools, Mr. Pierce. I am fortunate to have this position." "Seems wasteful. You have a sharper mind than half the lawyers I have met." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Well, we make do with the opportunities available to us. At least here I can help people like you in small ways." Nothing small about saving a man's home. They finished the response by early evening, and Helena promised to have it posted to the county office the next morning. Pierce lingered at the door, seeming reluctant to leave. "Miss Brennan, I wonder if I might impose on you further." He shifted his weight, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you be willing to look over this before I subject anyone else to it?" He pulled a small, worn journal from his satchel and offered it to her. Helena took it carefully, opening to pages filled with dense handwriting. "What is this?" "Something I have been working on. Account of my time in the mountains, observations about the wildlife and seasons." "Probably foolish, but writing helps order my thoughts." Helena scanned a few passages, struck by the vivid descriptions and unexpected poetry in his words. "This is wonderful, Mr. Pierce. Your observations about the red-tailed hawks are particularly striking." "You really think so?" Vulnerability flickered across his rugged features. "I do. Have you considered trying to publish it? There is quite a market for accounts of frontier life." "Would not know where to begin with that. I have some contacts in San Francisco, editors who publish this sort of work." "If you are serious, I could make inquiries." Helena handed the journal back to him. "With some editing and organization, this could be something special." Pierce stared at the journal as if seeing it anew. "I came here for help with a legal letter. Now you are telling me I might be a writer." "Perhaps you already are one. You simply needed someone to recognize it." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are a remarkable woman, Miss Brennan." "I am simply a librarian who appreciates good writing when she sees it." "No." He shook his head slowly. "You are more than that, much more." Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I should close the library. It is well past time. Of course, I have taken enough of your day." Pierce moved to leave, then paused. "Miss Brennan, might I call on you again, not for legal help or editing, just to talk?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I would like that, Mr. Pierce." "Thaddeus," he corrected. "Call me Thaddeus. Then you must call me Helena." His smile transformed his entire face, revealing warmth she had not seen before. "Helena, suits you." After he left, Helena stood in the empty library with her hand pressed to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. She had lived so long among books, experiencing romance only through pages and ink. Now something real and terrifying and wonderful was beginning, and she found herself both thrilled and afraid. Thaddeus returned 3 days later with fresh venison and an invitation. "Thought you might like to see the place we are fighting to keep," he said. "If you are free tomorrow, I could take you up to the cabin." Helena hesitated. A full day alone with a man she barely knew, traveling into the mountains where no one would hear her if she needed help. Every practical consideration argued against it. But something in his eyes, an honesty and gentleness that contrasted with his imposing exterior, made her want to take the risk. "I would need to be back by evening," she said. "I have a delivery of new books coming." His grin was answer enough. They set out the next morning before dawn, Thaddeus arriving with 2 horses. Helena had not ridden in years, but he helped her mount with patient guidance, his hands strong and steady. They rode northeast out of Calistoga as the sun rose over the Mayacamas Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The trail climbed steadily through oak woodlands and chaparral, the air growing cooler and scented with pine as they gained elevation. Thaddeus led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife, his knowledge of the terrain encyclopedic. Helena found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, enjoying the rare freedom of being away from town and her routines. "Not much farther," Thaddeus called back after 2 hours of riding. "Creek is just ahead." They emerged into a small valley carved by a clear stream. On a rise above the water sat a sturdy cabin built from hand-hewn logs, smoke curling from a stone chimney. Outbuildings included a small barn, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. Everything showed careful construction and maintenance, the work of someone who took pride in their craft. "Thaddeus, this is beautiful," Helena breathed, taking in the scene. He helped her dismount and she walked to the edge of the creek, watching sunlight dance on the water. Wildflowers dotted the meadow and birds sang from the surrounding pines. It felt like a different world from dusty Calistoga. "Let me show you inside," Thaddeus said, leading her to the cabin. The interior surprised her with its order and comfort. Books lined a shelf near the stone fireplace, and a sturdy table occupied the center of the single room. A bed stood in one corner, neatly made, and the floor had been swept clean. Tools hung in careful arrangement on the walls, and dried herbs dangled from the ceiling beams. "You have books," Helena said, moving to examine the shelf. She found works by Thoreau, Emerson, some poetry, and several practical guides on farming and animal husbandry. "Told you, writing helps me think. Reading does too." Thaddeus busied himself building a fire in the hearth. "Figured if I was going to live alone, might as well improve my mind." Helena pulled down the volume of Thoreau's Walden and opened it to find extensive notes in the margins. "You have engaged deeply with these texts." Thoreau understood something about living deliberately, away from society's noise. He glanced back at her. "Though I confess, the isolation can be heavy some days." "I know something about that." Helena replaced the book. "The library can feel quite isolated, even surrounded by a town. That is why you live in stories." "Yes," she met his gaze. "I suppose you do too in your way. Your journal is full of stories about this place." Thaddeus prepared a simple meal of venison, beans, and cornbread, and they ate outside, watching the play of light on the valley. Helena felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in years. The constant weight of propriety and expectations fell away here, leaving only the present moment. "Why did you really come to Calistoga?" Thaddeus asked, leaning back against a log. "Woman with your education could have found better opportunities in San Francisco." Helena was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. "My father died 18 months ago. He was a printer, taught me to love books from childhood. After he passed, I could not bear staying in the city. Everything reminded me of him." The library position was advertised, and it seemed like a chance to start fresh. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. He would have liked you, I think. He appreciated men who valued learning regardless of their station." "What about your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Consumption. It was just father and me after that." Helena watched a hawk circle overhead. "What about your family?" Thaddeus's expression darkened. "Mother died of fever when I was young. Father owned a plantation in Virginia, worked it with 20 slaves. I hated everything about that life, but the war came before I could leave. Joined the Union Army the moment Virginia seceded. Father never forgave me. That must have been difficult. Necessary." Some things are more important than family loyalty. He tossed a pebble into the creek. Father died during the war, plantation burned. My older brother survived but lost everything. Last letter I got from him was 5 years ago, asking for money. I sent what I could but heard nothing since. Helena reached across the space between them and touched his hand. I am sorry. He turned his palm up, gently grasping her fingers. We all carry our ghosts. At least out here they are quieter. They sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the valley. Helena felt something shift inside her, a wall she had carefully maintained beginning to crumble. She had told herself she was content with books and solitude, that she needed nothing more. But Thaddeus's presence awakened something she had buried, a longing for connection with another human being. I should get you back, Thaddeus said reluctantly as the sun dipped toward the western ridgeline. Do not want folks talking about you being gone after dark. The return ride seemed to pass more quickly, though neither of them spoke much. When they reached Calistoga and Thaddeus helped her dismount in front of the library, Helena found herself reluctant to let go of his hand. Thank you for showing me your home, she said. I understand now why you are fighting so hard for it. Thank you for helping me fight, and for coming today. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Helena, I know I am not the sort of man a woman like you would typically consider, but I would like to court you properly if you would allow it. Helena's breath caught. I would like that very much, Thaddeus. His smile was worth every risk. Then I will call on you tomorrow evening if that suits you. It suits me perfectly. She watched him ride away, then climbed the stairs to her apartment in a daze. The delivery of books waited outside her door, but she barely noticed them as she carried the crates inside. Her mind replayed every moment of the day, every word and gesture, the feeling of his rough hand holding hers. That night, she tried to read but could not focus. Finally, she gave up and stood at her window, looking out at the dark mountains where Thaddeus was sleeping in his cabin. She wondered if he was lying awake too, thinking of her. Over the following weeks, Thaddeus courted Helena with a thoughtfulness that touched her deeply. He brought her wildflowers from the mountain meadows, always careful to explain what each variety was and where it grew. He read books she recommended and discussed them with her, his insights often surprising in their depth. They took walks along the creeks outside town, talking for hours about everything and nothing. The townspeople noticed, of course. Calistoga was too small for such a courtship to go unremarked. Some of the women whispered that Helena was foolish to waste herself on a mountain hermit, that she could do better. But others saw how Thaddeus looked at her, the way his hard features softened when she entered a room, and they approved. That man is utterly besotted with you, Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, told Helena one afternoon, I have known Pierce for years, never seen him smile the way he does around you. Helena felt her cheeks warm. He is a good man. He is better than good. He is honorable, and those are rare. Mrs. Chen wrapped Helena's purchases in brown paper. Do not let the gossips discourage you. Follow your heart. Helena took those words with her as summer deepened into fall. The legal challenge to Thaddeus's land was proceeding slowly through the courts, but their carefully documented response had given the judge pause. The case was postponed pending further investigation, giving them time to gather additional evidence. Through it all, Helena felt herself falling irrevocably in love. Thaddeus was unlike any man she had known, combining strength with gentleness, wilderness skills with intellectual curiosity. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and never tried to diminish her intelligence. With him, she could be fully herself. One evening in October, Thaddeus arrived at the library just as Helena was closing. Walk with me, he asked. They strolled through town and out along the road that led toward the hot springs. The air had turned crisp with the approaching winter, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I heard from the judge," Thaddeus said. "They are ruling in my favor. The land is mine, legally and officially." Helena stopped walking and turned to him, grasping his hands. "Thaddeus, that is wonderful news. Could not have done it without you." He pulled her close, his arms encircling her. "Helena, I have been alone for 7 years, thought I preferred it that way. Then I walked into that library and found you, and everything changed." "For me too," she whispered. He tilted her chin up with one finger. "I love you. Have since that first day, I think, watching you explain legal terms with such passion. You brought light into my life when I did not even know I was living in darkness. I love you too." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. "You showed me there is more to life than hiding in books. You make me want to live my own story." Thaddeus kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she pressed against him. Helena felt as though she was falling and flying at the same time, every nerve alive with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Come live with me on the mountain. I know it is not an easy life, but I will spend every day making you happy." "Yes," Helena laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Calistoga. Helena wore a dress of deep blue silk she had ordered from San Francisco, and Thaddeus appeared in a new suit that made him look only slightly less like he belonged in the wilderness. Mrs. Chen and her husband stood as witnesses, along with a handful of townspeople who had come to support them. The morning after the wedding, Helena closed the library for the last time as its caretaker. She had found a replacement, a young man from Napa who was eager for the position. As she locked the door and handed over the key, she felt a pang of loss mixed with excitement for what lay ahead. Thaddeus loaded her belongings onto a wagon, including several crates of her personal books. "Are you certain about this?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "It is not too late to change your mind. I could build you a library in town, visit on weekends." Helena cupped his bearded face in her hands. "I am certain. My home is with you now, wherever that may be." The cabin felt different as Helena's home rather than a place she was merely visiting. Together, they made adjustments over the following months. Thaddeus built her an addition to house her books, creating a small library with a window overlooking the valley. He crafted a writing desk where she could work on correspondence and the editing projects she had begun taking on from publishers in San Francisco. In turn, Helena brought warmth to the cabin beyond what any fire could provide. She planted herbs and vegetables in a garden plot, made curtains for the windows, and filled the space with music from the piano Thaddeus had hauled up the mountain piece by piece. On winter evenings, they would read aloud to each other by the fire, or work on Thaddeus's nature writings, which were indeed gathering interest from publishers. Their life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Thaddeus hunted and maintained the property, while Helena managed their household and continued her editing work. They made the journey to Calistoga once a month for supplies, often staying overnight with Mrs. Chen, who had become a dear friend. But mostly, they existed in their mountain sanctuary, just the two of them against the world. The isolation that had once felt oppressive to both of them became a gift when shared. They talked endlessly about books and philosophy, about their pasts and dreams for the future. They explored the mountains together, Thaddeus showing Helena the secret places he had discovered in his years alone. She learned to ride confidently, to identify animal tracks, to read the weather in the clouds. In the spring of 1884, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Thaddeus. When she finally shared the news one morning at breakfast, he sat in stunned silence for a long moment. "A baby," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Helena asked, suddenly nervous. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified might be more accurate, but in the best possible way. "I am terrified too," Helena admitted. "I have no experience with children and we are so far from town, from a doctor." "We will figure it out together." Thaddeus kissed her forehead. "Besides, Mrs. Chen served as midwife for half the women in the valley. She will help us when the time comes." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Helena continued her work and daily activities, though Thaddeus became increasingly protective as her belly swelled. He insisted on accompanying her on even short walks, worried she might fall or overexert herself. Helena found his concern endearing, if occasionally excessive. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. You are the most precious thing in my life." In early November, Helena went into labor during the night. Thaddeus rode to Calistoga at breakneck speed, returning before dawn with Mrs. Chen. The labor lasted through the day and into the following night, Helena's screams echoing through the valley. Thaddeus paced outside the cabin, helpless and terrified, until Mrs. Chen finally called him in. He entered to find Helena exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your son," she said. Thaddeus approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant. Tears streamed down his face as he gently touched the baby's impossibly small hand. "He is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Helena's father. The baby transformed their lives completely, filling the cabin with new sounds and purposes. Helena had never imagined she could love anything as much as she loved Thomas, except perhaps his father. Watching Thaddeus with their son, seeing this powerful man reduced to helpless adoration by a tiny infant, made her fall in love with him all over again. The winter of 1884 proved harsh, with heavy snows that occasionally trapped them in the cabin for days at a time. But they had prepared well, and Helena found a cozy contentment in those snowbound days, the three of them warm by the fire while the world outside turned white and silent. Thaddeus's book found a publisher in the spring of 1885, a small press in San Francisco that specialized in natural history and frontier accounts. The advance was modest, but the prestige of being a published author meant more to him than money. Helena helped him with final edits, proud of his accomplishment. "None of this would have happened without you," Thaddeus told her as they reviewed the page proofs. "You saw something in me I did not see in myself." "You were always a writer," Helena said. "I just pointed it out." "No, you made me believe I could be more than just a mountain man hiding from the world. You gave me a reason to engage with life again." Thomas grew into a healthy, curious toddler who kept them both busy. Helena taught him letters using her books, while Thaddeus took him on gentle hikes around the property, teaching him about plants and animals. The cabin rang with his laughter and endless questions. In the summer of 1886, Helena became pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident, knowing what to expect. Thaddeus was no less protective, but he had learned to balance his concern with respect for Helena's independence. Their daughter was born the following spring during a rainstorm, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Chen barely made it in time. They named her Grace, and she had her mother's delicate features and her father's green eyes. Thomas, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The years rolled by in a pattern of seasons and small joys. Thomas and Grace grew strong and bright, educated by their mother's extensive library and their father's wilderness skills. Thaddeus published a second book, then a third, building a modest reputation as a naturalist writer. Helena's editing work continued to bring in steady income, and they had saved enough to make significant improvements to the property. In 1890, when Thomas was 6 and Grace 3, they expanded the cabin significantly, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper parlor. Thaddeus also built a small schoolhouse nearby, thinking ahead to when the children would need more structured education. One evening that fall, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Helena leaned against Thaddeus's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your solitude for all this chaos?" "Not for a single moment." He wrapped his arm around her. "You wrote yourself into my story that day you helped me fight for this land, and you made it better than anything I could have written alone." "I think it was the other way around," Helena said. "You walked into my library and showed me there was a whole world beyond books, a life worth living instead of just reading about. Maybe we wrote it together then." He kissed the top of her head. "Our own story." Thomas ran past, chasing a frog, with Grace toddling after him as fast as her short legs could carry her. Helena watched them with a smile, thinking about the scared young woman who had hidden herself in a library, believing books were safer than life. She would never have imagined this, a family, a true home, a love that deepened with every passing year. "What are you thinking?" Thaddeus asked. "That I am happy, truly, completely happy." "Good." He pulled her closer. "That is all I have ever wanted." By 1895, Thomas was 11 and showing an aptitude for both his parents' talents. He loved reading and writing, but also possessed his father's skill with tracking and wilderness survival. Grace, now 8, was quieter and more introspective, spending hours sketching the wildlife around their home with remarkable talent. Helena had thought they were done having children, but life surprised her with another pregnancy at 36. This one proved more difficult, leaving her exhausted and unwell. Thaddeus worried constantly, refusing to leave her side for more than a few hours at a time. "You need to stop hovering," Helena told him one afternoon as she rested in bed. "I am fine, just tired." "You are not fine. You can barely keep food down. It will pass. It did with the others, remember." But the pregnancy continued to be challenging, and when Helena went into labor in early December, complications arose. The baby, another boy, was born healthy, but Helena hemorrhaged severely. Mrs. Chen worked frantically to stop the bleeding while Thaddeus held Helena's hand, his face white with fear. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Helena, please stay with me." "I am trying," she managed, her voice weak. Mrs. Chen finally succeeded in stopping the bleeding, but the ordeal left Helena terribly weakened. She spent weeks recovering, unable to do more than hold their new son, whom they named Henry. Thaddeus cared for all of them, managing the household and children with surprising competence while Helena slowly regained her strength. "I was so scared," he confessed one night as she nursed Henry. "I could not imagine this life without you. I am still here." Helena took his hand. "A little worse for wear, but here." Mrs. Chen said, "No more children. Your body cannot take it." Helena felt a pang of sadness but nodded. 3 children were a blessing, more than she had ever expected to have. "Then we will be grateful for the family we have." As Henry grew, it became clear he had inherited his father's size and strength. Even as a toddler, he was sturdy and fearless, climbing everything he could reach. Thomas took his role as oldest brother seriously, watching over both his siblings. Grace remained the gentle heart of the family, always ready with comfort when someone was hurt or sad. The new century arrived, bringing changes to the world beyond their mountain. Calistoga was growing, attracting more tourists to its hot springs. The railroad had reached the valley, making travel easier. But life on the mountain continued much as it always had, governed by seasons and the rhythms of nature rather than the rush of progress. Thomas left for college in San Francisco in 1899, his parents' savings and his own scholarship covering the tuition. He wanted to study natural sciences, inspired by his father's work. His departure left a hole in the family, though he wrote long letters and returned for holidays. Thaddeus was 51 now, his dark hair streaked with gray, though his strength remained undiminished. Helena was 40, with silver beginning to thread through her brown hair. They had lived on the mountain for 16 years, building a life that was wholly their own. One evening in the spring of 1900, after the younger children were in bed, Helena and Thaddeus sat in their small library, reading by lamplight. Helena looked up from her book to find him watching her. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just remembering the day I walked into the library in Calistoga, desperate for help with a legal letter. I had no idea I was about to meet the woman who would change my entire life. I remember, too, you were so large you barely fit through the door, but you had the kindest eyes I had ever seen." "I fell in love with you that first day," Thaddeus admitted. "Watching you explain property law with such passion and intelligence, treating me like my thoughts mattered even though I was just an uneducated mountain man. You were like no woman I had ever met. You were like no man I had ever met. You valued learning for its own sake, not for status or profit. You saw me as an equal, not just a librarian." Thaddeus set down his book and crossed to where Helena sat, pulling her to her feet. "Dance with me. There is no music. Then we will make our own." He hummed a waltz as they moved around the small room, bodies close, moving in perfect harmony. Helena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling safer and more content than she had ever thought possible. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always will." The years continued their steady march. Grace discovered a talent for writing and illustration, creating nature guides that combined her drawings with detailed observations. Local schools began using her work, bringing in a small income. Henry grew into a giant like his father, standing 6 feet tall by the age of 14. He had no interest in books or writing, preferring to work with his hands, building and creating with wood and stone. Thomas graduated from college in 1903 and surprised everyone by deciding to stay in San Francisco, taking a position with the Academy of Sciences. He visited when he could, but his life had taken him away from the mountain. Helena felt the bittersweet pang of watching her child forge his own path, proud and sad in equal measure. "That is what we raised them for," Thaddeus reminded her after Thomas left following one visit. "To find their own way in the world. I know. It just makes me realize how quickly time passes. We still have Grace and Henry, and each other, always each other." In 1905, Grace met a young botanist who had come to the area studying native plants. Daniel Sheffield was quiet and earnest, with ink-stained fingers and an encyclopedic knowledge of California flora. He and Grace spent hours tramping through the mountains, identifying and documenting species. By fall, he was asking Thaddeus's permission to court her. "She is only 18, Helena fretted. "So young." "Same age you were when we met," Thaddeus pointed out. "I was 24. You know what I mean. Old enough to know her own heart." Grace and Daniel married the following spring in a ceremony by the creek, with wildflowers everywhere and birds singing in the trees. They settled in Calistoga, where Daniel took a position at an experimental farm. Grace continued her nature guides while helping with his research. The cabin felt quiet with only Henry still at home, now 16 and restless. He talked about moving to San Francisco to work in construction, using his size and strength to help build the city that was still recovering from the devastating earthquake of 1906. "Should we try to stop him?" Helena asked Thaddeus. "Could we?" He smiled ruefully. "They are all finding their places in the world. We gave them the tools they needed. Now we have to trust them to use them." Henry left in the fall of 1907, and for the first time in over 20 years, Helena and Thaddeus were alone in the cabin. The silence felt strange at first, almost oppressive. Helena wandered through the rooms, touching things that belonged to her children, feeling their absence keenly. "Come here," Thaddeus called from the porch one evening. She joined him, and he pulled her into his lap as they watched the sun set over the valley. "This is how it started," he said. "Just the two of us. We are not the same people we were then. No, we are better, richer for everything we have experienced together." He kissed her gently. "I get to fall in love with you all over again without interruptions from children." Helena laughed. "You are incorrigible. And you love it." They settled into a new rhythm, reminiscent of their early years together, but deepened by decades of shared life. Thaddeus continued writing, now working on a comprehensive natural history of the California mountains. Helena edited his work and managed correspondence with publishers and researchers who sought his expertise. Thomas married in 1908, wedding a fellow scientist in San Francisco. They visited the mountain for their honeymoon, and Thomas's wife, Patricia, was enchanted by the cabin and the life his parents had built. "I understand now where you come from," she told Thomas. "This place is magical." Grace and Daniel had their first child in 1909, a daughter named Helena. When they brought the baby to meet her namesake, Helena held her granddaughter and felt time collapse, remembering when she had held Thomas for the first time, terrified and overwhelmed. Now she was a grandmother, which seemed impossible. "How did we get so old?" she asked Thaddeus that night. "Gradually, then suddenly." He wrapped his arms around her from behind as they stood on the porch. "But I would not change anything. Every gray hair, every ache and pain, they are all worth it." Henry wrote from San Francisco, where he was working on the construction of a new bridge. His letters were brief and infrequent, but they conveyed his happiness with his work and life in the city. He had met a woman, he mentioned casually, someone named Sarah who worked in a bakery near his boarding house. "Another wedding on the horizon," Helena predicted, probably. That boy was never meant for solitude. The years of the 1910s brought more grandchildren, more weddings, more reasons to travel down to Calistoga or even to San Francisco. But the mountain remained Helena and Thaddeus's true home, the place where they returned to find peace in each other. In 1915, Thaddeus's comprehensive natural history was published to significant acclaim. At 66, he found himself briefly famous, sought after for lectures and consultations. He gave a few talks in San Francisco, uncomfortable with the attention but pleased that his life's work was recognized. "My mountain hermit has become a celebrity," Helena teased him after one particularly well-attended lecture. "I hate it. All these people, asking questions, wanting things. Then we go home, back to our mountain. Best suggestion I have heard all week." Helena was 56 now, her hair more silver than brown, her face lined with age and laughter. Her hands, once smooth and soft from library work, were roughened by years of mountain life. But her eyes remained sharp and bright, and her mind was as keen as ever. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1913 with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin. It was chaotic and loud, the space bursting with life and love. Thomas had 2 children now, Grace 3, and Henry had finally married his Sarah and brought her to meet the family. She fit right in, laughing at Henry's stories and helping in the kitchen without being asked. "Look what we made," Thaddeus whispered to Helena as they surveyed the crowded cabin. "Look what love made," she corrected. As the 1920s arrived, both Helena and Thaddeus began to feel their age more acutely. Thaddeus's knees ached on cold mornings, and Helena's eyes required spectacles for close work. They moved more slowly, took more rests during their walks. But they remained together, still in love, still each other's favorite person. "You ever miss the library?" Thaddeus asked one day as they sorted through old correspondence. "Sometimes I miss the books, though I have plenty here, but I do not miss that life, the loneliness of it." Helena looked at him. "You gave me so much more than I ever imagined having. You gave me a reason to rejoin the world. Before you, I was just existing. You showed me how to truly live." In 1924, they were blessed with the arrival of their first great-grandchild, Thomas's first grandchild, a boy named Thaddeus in honor of his great-grandfather. The family gathered again at the cabin, now truly bursting at the seams with multiple generations. "We need a bigger house," Helena said, half joking. "Or fewer relatives," Thaddeus replied, though his eyes shone with joy as he held his tiny namesake. They talked occasionally about moving to Calistoga, where life would be easier as they aged. But neither could bring themselves to leave the mountain. This was where they had built their life together, where every tree and rock held memories. Here they had loved and laughed, raised children, survived challenges, and grown old together. "I want to die here," Helena said one evening as they watched yet another sunset. "When my time comes, I want it to be on this mountain with you." "We still have years left," Thaddeus protested. "I know, but whenever it happens, I want to be here. Then here we will stay." They were both in their 70s now, ancient by most standards, yet still active and engaged with life. Thaddeus could no longer hike for miles, but he could still chop wood and maintain the property. Helena's hands were too arthritic for much writing, but she could still read for hours, her voice strong as she read aloud to Thaddeus by the fire. The 1930s brought economic hardship to much of the country, but life on the mountain remained relatively unchanged. They grew most of their own food, had savings from Thaddeus's books, and needed little from the outside world. Their children worried about them, tried to convince them to move to town where life would be easier. "We are fine," Helena insisted. "We have everything we need right here." "You are both stubborn as mules," Thomas said, though his tone was affectionate. "It is part of our charm," Thaddeus replied. In 1935, Thaddeus had a health scare, a pain in his chest that left him weak for several days. The doctor, summoned from Calistoga, diagnosed a mild heart episode and prescribed rest. Helena fussed over him like never before, insisting he take it easy. "I am fine," Thaddeus grumbled from his chair by the fire. "You are 78 years old and just had a heart attack." "You will rest if I have to tie you to that chair. 52 years together and you are still bossy. 52 years together and you still need managing." But the scare reminded them both of their mortality. That night, lying in bed, Helena curled against Thaddeus's side as she had done for decades. "I am not ready to lose you," she whispered. "You will not yet. I have too much to live for." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, you would miss me too much. Insufferably arrogant even now." "You love it. I love you. I love you too. Always have, always will." They continued on, growing older but not necessarily frailer. The mountain kept them active, the fresh air and simple life sustaining them. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1943, surrounded once again by family. The cabin and surrounding property now included several additional structures, built over the years to accommodate the expanding family during visits. 50 years, Helena marveled as they danced slowly to music played by one of their great-grandchildren. It seems like both forever and no time at all. Best 50 years of my life, Thaddeus said. Every single day with you has been a gift, even when I am bossy, especially then. In the spring of 1945, as the war overseas was finally ending, Thaddeus became ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Helena's devoted care, he did not recover. He died on a sunny morning in May, holding Helena's hand, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. "I love you," were his last words. "You made my life beautiful." Helena was devastated by his loss, the grief almost unbearable. For 54 years he had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The cabin felt emptier than it had even when the children first left, his absence a physical ache. The family tried to convince her to move to town to live with one of them. But Helena refused. "This is where we lived," she said. "This is where I will stay until I join him." She was 86 now, frail but determined. Her children took turns staying with her, making sure she was never alone for long. But Helena spent most of her time in the library Thaddeus had built for her, surrounded by books, reading the journals he had written over the years. One passage, written early in their marriage, made her cry every time she read it. "Helena walked into my life and transformed it completely. She is the story I want to live in forever, the only tale worth telling. Everything good in my life flows from that day she helped me fight for this land. She saved more than my property. She saved my soul." Helena lived for 3 more years, growing weaker but never losing her mental acuity. She continued editing work almost until the end, her children and grandchildren bringing her manuscripts to review. On a warm evening in August 1948, she sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace beside her. "It is beautiful," Grace said. "Your father and I watched thousands of sunsets from this spot," Helena replied. "Each one was perfect because we were together." That night, Helena died peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Thaddeus for over half a century. She was 89 years old. The family gathered once more at the cabin, this time for a funeral. They buried Helena next to Thaddeus in the small cemetery they had created years earlier, beneath the pine trees with a view of the valley. Their headstones were simple, listing only names and dates, but the love they represented had been anything but simple. Thomas, now 64 himself, stood with his siblings after the service, looking at the cabin and the land his parents had fought for and loved. "What do we do with it?" Henry asked. "We keep it," Thomas said firmly. "This place is their legacy. It is where they built something beautiful out of nothing but love and determination. We preserve it for future generations." And they did. The cabin became a family retreat, maintained by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It stood as a testament to what Helena and Thaddeus had created together. A mountain man and a librarian who found each other against all odds. In the small library addition, they kept Thaddeus's journals and Helena's correspondence, preserving the story of their love. Visitors could read about the day a desperate mountain man walked into a library seeking help with a legal letter, and found instead the love of his life. They could trace the years through letters and journal entries, watching 2 solitary people build a family and a life that lasted over half a century. The story of the librarian who lived among books and the mountain man who wrote himself into her story became family legend, passed down through generations. It was a reminder that love can find you anywhere, even in the dusty stacks of a small-town library. That 2 people, both hiding from life in their own ways, could find in each other the courage to truly live. The cabin still stood decades later, weathered but strong, overlooking the valley where Helena and Thaddeus had spent their best years. Inside, their books remained on the shelves, their furniture worn but cared for, their presence still felt in every corner. And on quiet evenings, when the wind rustled through the pines and the creek murmured its eternal song, those who visited swore they could feel the love that had soaked into every timber and stone. The love of a woman who learned to live beyond pages, and a man who learned to open his heart again. The love that had begun with a simple request for help, and ended only when death itself could no longer be denied. It was a love story written not in books but in life, in shared sunsets and whispered conversations, in children raised and grandchildren held, in 54 years of choosing each other every single day. And like all the best stories, it lived on long after its authors were gone, inspiring those who came after to believe in the power of love to transform lives. The final entry in Thaddeus's last journal, written just weeks before his death, reads simply, "Helena is sleeping beside me, silver-haired and beautiful. We are both old now, worn by time, but my love for her has only grown stronger. If I have learned anything in my 87 years, it is this. Love is the only story worth telling, and loving Helena has been my life's greatest privilege. To anyone who reads this years hence, remember that it is never too late to let someone into your heart. I was 41 and resigned to solitude when she walked into my life. She gave me everything I never knew I needed. Choose love. Always choose love." And that was perhaps the truest summary of their story, written in the hand of the mountain man who had found his heart again in the eyes of a librarian. A story of love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, built on respect and passion, and the simple choice to face life together rather than alone. Their children ensured that the cabin and land remained in the family, creating a trust that would preserve it in perpetuity. Each generation added to it, carefully, respectfully, honoring what Helena and Thaddeus had built. The library grew with editions of books by and about them, chronicles of their remarkable life together. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Helena and Thaddeus were together still, watching the sunsets they had loved, holding hands as they had done for 54 years, their story complete, their love eternal. The librarian and the mountain man, forever intertwined in the tale they had written together, one beautiful day at a time.